smettetela di lamentarvi, smettetela di chiedere che vi facciano un partito, che vi facciano un movimento, che vi facciano la rava, la fava. Fatevelo.
Serve un trauma, serve una presa di coscienza, serve un qualcosa che scuota.
Coraggio intellettuale di accettare la realtà dei fatti.
Senti, ma quanto va avanti sta roba qui?
Finché non c'è una bella sveglia. E chissà quando arriva la bella sveglia.
Sia mai detto che io mi perdo una battaglia persa.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. We are truly happy to have you with us today for this live conversation on education, a topic that often shapes the future in ways we only understand much later. For the next hour and a half, I am Valentina, and together with Giacomo Colombari, we'll be hosting a dialogue that we hope will open both reflection and horizons. We are deeply honored to welcome Professor Pasi Sahlberg, and we thank him for his precious time. Professor Sahlberg is a Finnish educator and internationally respected policy expert who is spending his life studying how education systems succeed and, more importantly, why they fail. He served as Director General at Finland Ministry of Education and Culture, and he worked with some of the most important international institutions in the field, including the World Bank, where he was a senior education specialist, and the OECD, where he served as a senior education expert. He also spent 3 years in Turin, working with the European Training Foundation, gaining a close and informed look at Italy's institutional landscape. He has taught at Harvard University and today is Professor of Educational Leadership at the University of Melbourne. His books, Finnish Lessons, In Teacher We Trust, Let the Children Play, are not just academic references, but have become guideposts for educators and policymakers all around the world. We are also joined today by Professor Michele Boldrin, currently Distinguished Professor of Economics at Washington University in St. Louis, but I prefer to hand him the floor to briefly introduce himself and the ambitious political project he launched a year ago, and that is aiming at bringing back to Italian politics competencies, growth, and courage. Michele, over to you.
Thanks, Valentina. If you don't mind, and I'm sure Pasi will understand a bit my Italian, I'll do a brief welcome in Italian, and then I let you guys work. The working language today is English because our guest maybe understands a bit of Italian, but I think it's better if we use English, being also the international language in this case. Allora, l'argomento, come sapete, è la scuola. Sulla scuola, il Drin Drin ci ha messo l'anima, è una delle cose che ha motivato fin dall'inizio Alberto Forchielli e il sottoscritto a discutere, a berciare, a urlare, a dire scemenze, e poi a lanciare l'appello che un anno dopo, perché oggi siamo il 6 luglio, quindi giusto, visto che domenica sarebbe quella giusta, ecco, no? Evidentemente è stato giusto 52 domeniche fa, sono 52 settimane dell'anno, right? I always get confused with that. Si è lanciato l'appello sta crescendo, maturando, siamo entrati nella fase di costruzione del partito. Per quanto ci riguarda, la scuola di ogni ordine e grado in Italia va rifatta, in alcuni casi letteralmente a cima a fondo, in altri casi forse meno. Vi sono esperienze nel mondo che dimostrano con i fatti pluriennali, che le cose si possono fare bene, si possono fare meglio, si possono migliorare. L'esperienza finlandese, in cui Pasi Sahlberg è stato un protagonista e anche un ispiratore, da quanto capisco, è una delle esperienze da studiare. Non è il modello, ma uno dei possibili modelli da cui apprendere. E coerentemente con l'approccio, ascoltiamo quello che ha da dire. Riprendiamo in un certo senso i Drin Drin domenicali, che una volta erano condotti tutti da Alberto e sottoscritto. Adesso che la bestiolina è cresciuta, che ci sono tante altre persone brave, che insomma che si sta cercando di fare quello che abbiamo detto di voler fare, cioè costruire un gruppo dirigente che faccia politica con competenza e coscienza, appariranno altre persone. Io sono qua a dare il benvenuto, adesso me ne sto zitto, and I leave the floor to Valentina, Giacomo and Pasi. Thanks.
Pasi, do you understand a little bit of Italian? Because I was seeing you smiling while Michele was speaking.
Sì, pochissimo, però molto poco. Yes,
Okay.
I understand something. I guess I know what Michele was saying, but it's limited. It's a long time since I was in a beautiful city of Torino. But yes, but my heart beats for Italy anyway. So.
Oh, wow, great. And I'm happy that you appreciate Italy. So we have to do something to make this place a great also country where to live and to study. And therefore, here today with you to understand how we can try to give our best in it. And before starting, Pasi, in our, let me say, conversation that we had through emails, I anticipated you a little bit the project, the aim of our association. And something that I forgot to tell you that I would like to highlight is that starting from this summer on, we will also handle a summer school for the delegate candidates, because we would like that people attending the movement would be also aware of how, let me say, policy really works. And therefore, every summer, our candidate will be trained for everything that is related to a country and to governing it that we don't know. So I hope that you also appreciate our, let me say, learning by doing, but also learning by learning approach. So now I think that we can start, Professor Sahlberg, and I would like to start from the ground zero question. That is, what should be the fundamental purpose of education for you?
Yeah, this is really a fundamental question, and I think all the policy work or reforming education systems should begin by asking this question. I guess we're going to touch upon this further along in the conversation, and it obviously it depends on who you ask or what the person you are asking this question is considering to be education. So there's no like a one answer to that question, but I guess that for me the main purpose really in the times like this is to kind of a twofold thing, is that the individual, whether they're children or young people or young adults or adults, that they would, first of all, the education would help them to learn about the world around them. And this has been traditionally the one of the classical purposes of education, starting from 400-500 years ago, when the education in Europe was established in a way like this. But then the other one that has not been traditionally so much part of the purpose of education, like a mass education or system of education, that I think is particularly important in a times like this. And the second purpose is that the education should help each individual to discover the world within them. And this is something that the education systems almost around the world, like inclusively, have paid much less attention to. That, in other words, I mean that education that is built around this dual purpose that I mentioned here, and this is my view, and I understand people may have different views. It means that in kind of a fundamental ways, education is individual. It's a kind of a personalized thing. So it's very difficult to have a mass education that would be standardized and aim at helping every child, for example, in this case, to realize their talent or passion or kind of an inner world. That just doesn't happen like this. So since you asked this question from me, I would say that obviously we need to help everyone to understand the world around them. And this is where we get into the kind of a complicated questions, because politicians, for example, may have very different views about what young people need to learn about the world around them, what is important, whether it's environments, like is the climate change part of those things, or should we study the history of other countries, or would it be just enough to understand what we do here? And then this kind of a helping particularly the adolescents and teenagers to realize that we all have a talent, And I've been working around this question for many years, and every time when I have a chance to meet young people in a kind of a larger group in a school, for example, ask, put your hand up. Can you put your hand up if you think that you truly feel that you are good at something, that you can do something really well? Most people don't do that. And then they say, I know a little bit of many things, but I don't feel like I have a particular talent. Somebody is good in sports or music or something else, they put their hand up, but they usually got those things outside of the school. And that's why I think for me it's so important, is this kind of a dual purpose of education. And then when I work with the education systems around the world, I always try to challenge people to think about what it would look like in your context, your country, for example, or within your policy, if you start to think about the purpose of education from those two dimensions. And it's a very different than we often see, that the purpose of education is to prepare skilled labor force, for example. That is important part of the education, but if that is the only purpose, that we are training people for work, most politicians will have to disappoint themselves, because much of that work that we are training young people now will be done by machines within the next 5 to 10 years. And so that's why what is work is an important question. But again, as I said, you hear different things when you ask this fundamental question from different people, but you asked me and I told you what I think.
Thank you for sharing your vision, because it really resonates with mine. And as you said, it's probably important starting from what there is inside me and what the community around me is asking, and then matching. And education probably should have the capability and the courage to valorize the, let me say, inner child that there is in every one of us, and try to give him the best possibilities. Of course, also matching with the needs that are around us. And so let's hope that with our work we can really have an impact over it. So thank you for sharing your vision. It's really precious. While preparing the interview, Professor Sahlberg, we thought it would have been crucial mentioning how did Finland build a trust-based education culture that helped to transform their educational system from mediocre in the 1980s to one of the models of educational excellence of today. And could you please give us an overview?
Yeah, it would be a longer story, but I try to keep it in a minute or two. I think, the first thing that we always need to understand, whether we talk about, in this case, Italy or Finland, is that the culture and history and traditions are extremely important. We can't understand the Finnish model or Finnish kind of a lessons unless we know a little bit about the where the country has been and what has happened. And it's the same with Italy and Australia, where I currently live, is the same thing, that we can't really have a global models and then just think that this is what everybody needs to do. I think that the Finnish thing, first of all, is interesting, because we have been historically, Finland has been between the East and the West always. Like, we have been part of the Russian Empire in the 19th century, and 600 years part of the Swedish kingdom, and then independent for the last 110 years, something like this. So, this thing, if you think about the nation trying to survive between East and West, and, being shifted back and forth, and then gaining independence without, the identity has always been a driving thing in Finland, that do we belong to the East or should we be part of the West? And I think that this latter option, Finland having an identity of being a Western nation with Sweden and other Scandinavian Nordic countries, and then the European Union and the OECD and others, has been a driving thing in education as well, because we immediately you start to ask questions like, so how can we be like those much more bigger and more developed and wealthier countries that already belong to the European Union or OECD? And that's where the obvious question, obvious answer to this question in a country that doesn't have any significant natural resources or nature or wealth that could be used for that, is education. So that's there was a political conclusion in the 1960s very, very quickly, when politicians were debating how do we build a nation that could be kind of equal to other European countries or the Scandinavian countries. And there was a moment of silence when people realized that we don't really have anything else, but we have the minds and heads of the people, so why don't we kind of try to educate the best out of people? And that's where this consensus, common understanding and acceptance of the importance of education came. That can be a little bit different in places like Italy, for example, or Australia, or the larger nations like France or England or United States, where thinking has been, when it comes to education, so that we don't need to educate everyone, that we are so many people, so many young people going to school. Why we are not just educating the kind of a so-called elite, or those young people who are able to become the leaders of the nation and the economy and other things. But in Finland, like if you have 5 million people, a little bit more or less, that you can think like this, that you need to have a strategy for your future that assumes that everybody needs to be educated. We cannot lose anyone. And we also do know that every single individual we lose in education, whether it's a dropout or failure or something like this, costs a lot of money in the long term, like unemployment and crime and health and many other things that we need to, as a kind of a poor nation like Finland, we have to think about those things as well. That how do we design this education thing in a way that will be elevating our nation to the same level as others, and make sure that we are not need to pay for the failure or some other things. So that is a kind of a short version of the historical, cultural reasons behind this thing. And then then if you take a political lens into this thing and you sit in the National Assembly or Parliament and you think about what type of reforms or policies or laws we need, it's much easier to say that we try to do a system that will somehow aim to be true to this importance of education and try to avoid something that would be costly during the longer run, or then would be adding cost to other public sectors like health, for example, or social issues. The other thing is the language, of course, that we have some European countries like the Netherlands, for example, where the kind of assumption is that people need to be able to speak different languages, and we have a bilingual nation. The Swedish and Finnish are the kind of a national official languages, which means that all the kids have to learn the language. But even that one, even if you speak Finnish and Swedish language in Finland, it doesn't take you too far. You can play ice hockey or football in Sweden or Norway, but you can't go anywhere further than that. So if you kind of a dream about working in Europe or going to the North America, anywhere in the world, really, you need to kind of accept that I need to learn another language that is often is English, or can be Italian or Spanish or French or something like this. But that kind of a need for learning another language has been a big driver in Finland also when it comes to education, because the school education is the best way. It's often the only way to make sure that your young people learn to speak different languages. I don't know any country in the world that would educate their young people to understand other languages, but not use the school for that. So those are the things that have created a kind of a cultural context of Finland that makes it easier to understand why some of the political policy decisions that we made in the 60s and 70s when this foundation was built were done in a way that they were made, like, for example, having a 9-year comprehensive compulsory school that has not been traditionally very common in Europe, for example, that all the kids go to the same school that is comprehensive in a sense that they learn a range of different curriculum areas there, including the manual kind of hands-on work, and boys and girls do the similar things. So that has been a really like a unique understanding that becomes understandable only against this kind of a cultural historical background, that we define the purpose of education in a little bit different ways, and then the history and realities around the country are driving, kind of enforcing that this is the good way to go. But then we're probably going to talk about teacher education, the role of teachers, and how the schools operate and other things in the future. But I just wanted to say this because I think I've met in my life too many people who come to Finland, or they read my books, and then they said, okay, so in our country we could do A, B, and C and be like Finland. And I said, no, it doesn't happen like this, because you need to take into consideration why Finland is doing this, or why any other country is having an education system as they do, and only then you can better understand what might be the new policies or new reforms or this new direction in the future that I guess that you all are having in mind here.
Thank you, Professor Sahlberg. To me and to Giacomo was really crucial speaking at you, not because, well, sometimes in Italy it happens something a little bit weird, that when you speak, for example, about a country like Finland, that I'm really enthusiastic about, Italian people believe that I'm doing a comparison between the two, but it's not a comparison, just looking at someone that is better at performing in some areas to see if we can do the same. It's not, it is the best and I want to be with him, but I would like to take him as a reference to do the best together. And something that really impressed me that is written in the first chapter of your book, especially in page 56, is the fact that there was a moment after the Second World War in which, as you said before, people were looking around themselves and telling, no, we cannot afford to leave anyone behind. So we have to be in this together and to grow. And this is really similar to the words that Michele Boldrin every time repeat to us. If you want to save yourself by yourself, please go away from Italy, because in this moment it's not probably to offer you the best that you of course deserve. But if you want to save yourself and also the other people around you, then be involved in politics. Try to really change things around you. And to me, your example, and then I will leave the floor to Giacomo Colombari, is really crucial, because Finland, to us, could teach us that it's possible to save ourselves also with others around. And now I leave the floor to Giacomo.
Thank you, Valentina. Just to say something about myself, I'm Giacomo. I coordinated the group education in the Drin Drin Association, and I teach in the Netherlands. So I'm a kind of Dutch teacher. I'm talking from the Dutch side. And one thing that, like, I've started reading your book, Mr. Sahlberg. So actually, I will finish it in the next weeks, because it's very interesting, especially the part about the education of teachers, because that was actually one of the most crucial things we talked about in our education group inside the association. But the thing is, like you describe the process of becoming a teacher in Finland as very selective. So like no one can just wake up one day and say, okay, I want to become a teacher. So there is a selection. And for example, for primary school teachers, so I took some notes because it's very interesting also for people listening. You have a selection process which is divided in two phases. The phase one is like a test based on some scientific articles about education, pedagogical sciences, etc. And so people are being judged on what they write about this article. And the second phase is like more like the personality and motivation of people will be tested. So they will be testing how much they can interact with young people and with students, and how much they can motivate them, and how much they are motivated to become teachers, and why. So that's very interesting. And there are also two other things that I took note from your book, which is the teacher education is academic because it must be supported by scientific knowledge. So there is this very clear connection between scientific knowledge and teaching. So teaching is not like random, but it must be based on the scientific theories. And autonomy and trust are really important for teachers. So like in Finland, you say in your book, Finland, the Finnish teachers are not really interested in salary, let's say, but it's more like their professional status. So they have a professional status and they want to be to work in autonomy and to be trusted as professionals. So my first question is, what cultural and policy decisions helped to build this professional status and the idea of a research-based education?
Yeah, Giacomo, this is a really great question, because it actually links to the previous discussion that we had. Now, if you think about the situation in schools where you have all of a sudden you have children coming with all kinds of backgrounds and abilities and circumstances in their lives, compared to the earlier situation in Finland, where we had a kind of a selective school system where kids like myself at the age of about 10, we were selected to, if I was more able, my parents were wealthier and able to support me, I went to the school system where most kids were like myself. And then the rest went to somewhere else. And then all of a sudden we have all these kids coming to the same school. So obviously, again, if you put your kind of a policymaker, politician hat on, you very quickly understand that we can't be successful with this system unless we have teachers who are very differently prepared to do what they're supposed to do. So that's where in Finland, where this kind of a thinking about what type of teachers we need to have if the country will be successful in this kind of a radical idea of doing away the private schools or selective schools and kind of have all the kids studying 9 years in the same school system, in the same classroom, in a kind of a mixed abilities. And obviously the conclusion is that, teachers need to have different skills and different knowledge. So that, and it's very important here to understand that this is the way it happened. It didn't happen that way, that somebody said, let's give all the teachers a master's degree and research-based academic education, and then they will teach in a better ways. I don't think that in Finland the idea of elevating the academic teacher education or moving the primary school teacher education to universities in the first place, and then upgrading that to be a master's graduate level training, had not much to do about how well teachers teach in a classroom. So the scientific knowledge that you mentioned is not only about what teaching methods or how you kind of handle the classroom situation, but it's also how teachers are able to, how much we can rely and trust, give the planning of teaching or planning the curriculum or assessing students at the hands of the teachers. And that was the big thing, especially in a very kind of a diverse groups of kids. So that was the kind of a thinking that, if we have, and it was a big debate in Finland, make no mistake, in the 1970s, when this happened in the universities and between policymakers, politicians and the universities, many policymakers were saying that it's too expensive for the country that doesn't have much resources for education anyway, to have university-trained primary school teachers. But the universities was making this case that, if we want to succeed with this new school system that has much more diversity, we need to have teachers that are prepared not only to teach in a different ways, but understand how they can plan and craft and design their own schools so that it would fit to these different kids. So, and that was a really smart conversation, kind of a political conversation. Exactly the same conversation, by the way, happened in Sweden and Norway as well, that traveled the similar way, but they never followed that principle through. So Sweden and Norway never kind of made a concrete things to move primary school teacher education to the universities, unlike Finland, where we are the only one that kind of believed in that and had an argument with the universities and politicians that, listen, if we're successful, if we want to succeed with this thing, we need different teachers, and this is the way, the best way to do that. Previously, I mentioned this, and Valentina, you took that point about the cost of loss, the cost of failure at the level of the students, that, those kids who drop out, they cost a lot of money usually for the governments and societies in Italy and in Finland and Australia as well. It's the same thing in teacher education. Teacher education is an expensive thing to have. So it takes a lot of money to train teachers for 3 or 4 or 5 years. And if you realize, like we do now in Australia or England or United States, that by the end of the 5th year of the service in school, teaching 5 years, half of the teachers realize that I made a wrong choice. I didn't know that teaching is something like this, or I didn't realize that actually I'm not a teacher person. I can't work with these noisy kids in the classroom, so that's not my job. Guess how much this will cost to the nation when we realize that we or these individual people when they pay for the education, only to realize that I made a wrong call. So that's why I think in a Finnish teacher education we do this kind of a very deep and careful selection to make sure that the young people understand where they are getting into. But at the same time, when we do that and teaching becomes more and more competitive to get into, it creates a kind of a positive challenge among young people, because young people in most countries, in Italy or Finland or Australia, they rather be in a situation where they feel that I was selected among the thousands, rather than they be in a group like in Australia now, where they say that we are all here because we couldn't get anywhere else, and or that everybody can, just like you said, Giacomo, that anybody can do this. So it's a kind of a smart way to also think about what young people, what their minds are saying and thinking when we are thinking about the teaching. And so that's a kind of a long answer to your question, why and what is behind these decisions in Finland when it comes to teacher education. It's not that simple. People often simplify this thing. It's just kind of an upgrade. Let's give them a master's degree. It's not like this. There has to be a good purpose behind this, because it's a very, very expensive. The cost between a bachelor's degree and master's degree, particularly if it's paid by the government, or even if it's paid by the students partially, it's huge. It's a big investment in the system. So we need to have a really good rationale and say that this investment will give us higher rate of return to this investment than anything else, and that has exactly happened.
Professor Sahlberg, when you were speaking, sorry, Giacomo, because I'm also reading the comments, and there is a comment before that we're asking to you, Professor Sahlberg, that in Italy we say that we see that also, let me say, teachers are being a little bit trained during the university. Is that different from Italy in that respect? Primary teachers have been trained, let me say, in the wild. Which are the main difference in training in Finland between the one, if you already know, or Giacomo can, let me say, give his perspective in Italy?
Between Italy and Finland?
Mm-hmm. In the education of the teacher at university, for example.
I don't know that exactly what is the difference there, because I'm not familiar with the details currently in Italian teacher education. But I do, for the person who was asking this question and anybody else, I think the important thing to understand is that when we look at the primary education, and I would say that in the Finnish teacher education in the universities, primary education is the kind of a most important part of, if there's one thing that is more, but it is like the most important part of the thing. And that's where all the graduates, before you can enter primary school classroom to teach, you need to, not only that you need to have a master's degree, but you need to have a research-based master's degree, so that you understand, you are able to read research, but you're also able to design research projects, that you're able to run a little research studies in your school or classroom if you want to. But particularly, it's the primary primary school teachers in Finland are what we often call a research literate. So their literacy in understanding research and critically read research, ask right question is there. And that's what is missing in most, I don't know, in Italy, but many other places, primary school teachers are not really treated in a way that they are able to, for example, have a good debate about the evidence, what the research evidence is saying about curriculum or teaching method assessment. But the Finnish primary school teachers are research literate in that sense, and they can often debate about policies and politicians' remarks. For example, standardized testing has been a classical thing in Finland for many years, and it's often the primary school teachers that come with the kind of evidence-based arguments about what are the benefits of having a system-wide, census-based, standardized assessment of all the kids in a classroom. And these questions, like again, back home in Australia, the teachers, primary school teachers, because of their training, they can even raise these questions. They kind of have to often accept what the authority is giving them and say that, this is what the global evidence says, and this is what we need to do here. But that has never happened in Finland because of the primary teachers, and all the teachers have this research-based training, and that's why I think that may be a difference between primary school teacher education in Finland and maybe in Italy as well, but I know that most other countries around the world for sure.
I stepped in. In Italy, they did introduce this thing about 24 years ago. It's been implemented progressively. There is, I have no specific knowledge of how this corso magistrale, it's a master degree. It doesn't have the 3-2 structure. It's called, I think, laurea in scienze della formazione primaria or something like that. And it is required, which means by now about 2/3 probably, or maybe half. While I was listening to you, I was trying to find data, but as usual, it's not easy. So I think it's about half of the workforce has that degree, which might be why. And I'll return to the background. My personal impression as an outsider, though, and with some conversation with people operating in that area, says that maybe primary education is where Italy currently is less removed from best practices around the world. It might be, but I have no expert knowledge of what the content and what the level of training and what the level of scientific rigor is of that specific.
Yeah.
This does not apply after primary school, which I think is one of the after primary school, above secondary, the all 8 years and so on are built on a teaching body, which is made of people that essentially win a concorso or in a form or another and have no specific training. Just for information.
Yeah, that's Giacomo. Can I just throw one thing that comes to mind when I listen to Michele's response here? I think there's another rationale behind this teacher education, like what type of ways and methods we should have in preparing our teachers, and it is this question whether we think that teaching is a profession or whether it's more like a craft. And there's still, the opinions are divided about this question depending on who you talk to, even within the countries, but internationally. That there are people who say that teaching is not really a profession in a sense that medical practice or law or designers or architects are. That the teachers don't need to have the knowledge and skills about how to design their work, how to work together with others, how to assess or evaluate, reflect on your own work, because most of the countries have authorities and mechanisms for curriculum development and assessment, testing centers and examinations that teachers don't need to worry about that thing. But what Finland has a very, very different way of doing this, because of this fact that teaching is universally accepted as a high profession, akin to. That's why we say often in Finland, teaching is like law or medicine, that it requires similar type of qualities of the professional, including that the professionals usually, actively follow their own. It's kind of a scientific development of their own profession, of whether it's a pedagogy or leadership or whatever it is, and that's exactly what is the kind of has been the purpose in Finland, is that we have intentionally wanted to make sure that teaching would be considered as a profession. And that goes back to this question of why there are so many young people who want to become teachers, because they understand that teaching is a profession in the same way, in a different field, but the same way as being a medical doctor or lawyer. That I need to study the equal amount of things. I need to be able to operate in the school, in my workplace in the same way, just like lawyers or doctors do teamwork, and they kind of collectively think about, how to win their case or or help the patient. And this is a very important part of this whole story in Finland, is that how do we create and recreate this image of being a teacher, especially young people who are in a school, because those are, especially high school, secondary school kids, they are the future teachers are there. And if they don't see this, if they don't kind of realize that the teaching profession is something, it's a kind of a competitive thing to all these other things, they will walk away. And then we have this unfortunate situation globally that in many countries, our new teachers will come from those young people who were left when all the other interesting options have been exhausted, like often medical economist and law and other things. And then this pool that is left there, that's where we draw our teachers, and that it doesn't have to be that way. And I think that the Finnish case is a good example of how do we rethink the whole thing in a way that we would have more young people in the future who would see teaching as their dream job.
Yeah, I was while you were speaking, I was also thinking about my experience here in the Netherlands. So when I studied to become a teacher here, so we have here in the Netherlands the Bachelor of Education followed by Master of Education, and I remember that, like, also here in the Netherlands, teaching is considered a profession. So you are like considered a professional. And I remember that one of the last things we did, like one of the last activities we did, was the professional dialogue. So I remember that I was put in a group with 4 other teachers or candidate teachers, let's say, and we were supposed to talk to each other following the rules of the professional dialogue. So like we were evaluating about how we were listening to others, responding to others, and like how we collect data and give an answer to our colleagues. So that was, we were evaluated really about that. So it was quite difficult because you had to read a lot of articles, collect data to do this dialogue with your colleagues. But actually the reason is that it's considered a profession. So and getting back to what Michele also was saying, in secondary schools in Italy, becoming a teacher, to become a teacher, you have to follow like 60 degrees, 60 credits is called. And these are like exams that you have to take at universities. So there are different exams offered by different universities. And when you collect all these exams and you have 20 credits, around 20 credits of internship in schools, then you can become a teacher. So you can go to do the concorso. So this Italian concorso, like his national concorso. And in Netherlands, it's quite different. Like when you get your degree, you can apply to schools directly, and you are evaluated the first year by your colleagues, by the by your school director, and also by other people. So you also have a coach, a personal coach, while you are teaching. So it's really considered a professional, like in like a 360 degrees. Yeah. And one thing that I want to ask you is about the standardized tests, because that's a difference between the two countries, Netherlands and Finland. For example, in your book, you say that standardized tests are not seen in a good way in Finland. Like Finnish teachers are they don't like a standardized test, like because they see it as a kind of a control from above on their work. And in the Netherlands, actually, standardized tests are really common. Like every year, the central exam, so like the national exam for the last school year, are used as a standardized test by the government to evaluate schools. And when school have bad reports and so on, so they have to change their own school program. For example, they have to check their teachers. So there are consequences, let's say. So the problem is, and many Dutch teachers say that, the bureaucracy. So it's a huge amount of bureaucracy making these tests, organizing these tests, also because you have different schools evaluating each other. So we have a kind of system that when we do a central test, we have to send our test to another school so that a third person checks our tests. And we don't know the name of this person or the address or whatsoever till the moment they say, hey, I checked your test, I send you back. So we can talk about it. So there is this bureaucracy. And my question is, how can a system sustain high levels of professional development, and also professional development, also talking about the development of teachers, like teachers, for example, in the Netherlands can follow a PhD, like in Finland. So there is this idea of lifelong learning. But the thing is still about the bureaucracy. So how can a system sustain high levels of professional development without falling in to excessive bureaucracy? So to not be like the victims of too much bureaucracy, because this is a problem sometimes here in the Netherlands.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. You probably have a better answer to that question than I do about the Finnish thing. But I mean, one aspect of that is probably the overall question of design. How do we design social systems like education, and the Finnish way of designing education, particularly from the point of view of bureaucracy and administration, is similar to the kind of a Finnish way of designing anything. Like if you look at the architecture or clothes or some other things, that is like a very, I often call it kind of a minimalist way of and functionalist way of designing things, meaning that like every part of the system should have a function and purpose. And education systems around the world, probably in the Netherlands as well, but certainly in many Anglo-Saxon countries like England or the United States or Australia or New Zealand, it's designed with a completely different purpose. That there's no kind of a functionality in mind. It's a side story is that I'm a passionate road cyclist, and happy to say this now when the Tour de France just started yesterday, and I know that the Dutch and Italians are good in. I follow every single etap of the Giro d'Italia as well. But there's one. I'm telling this story because there's one lesson, the kind of an Italian or French lesson there is that if you take the road bike that they use now in Tour de France or Giro, that is a good example. That's like a Finnish education system, because you can't in a road bike race bike you can't take a single part away without the bike being dysfunctional. So every part, every little thing has a purpose. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense. And that that's how the Finnish system has been designed. That we've been asking, and the teachers, these well-educated, trained teachers have been asking the same. Do we really need that? Is this like a necessary thing? Could we have an equally good education system without something else? And this is a design question. And if you trust your teachers, if you trust those people who are doing this work every day, and they tell you that this doesn't make any sense, this doesn't add any value to what we do with the kids, then of course it's good to have a conversation about whether we could do without that thing. And this is exactly how Finland has been able to remove many of those things that have little or no value to what teachers are doing. Standardized testing that you started, Giacomo, earlier is a good example of this. Now, let's make it clear that it's not entirely true that some people say that Finland doesn't like, or Finnish teachers don't like standardized testing. I think because there are very different ways of, having standardized testing. I think we all agree that it's good to have some sort of standardized testing in health. Like, just think about measuring your blood pressure or anything. Like, if there are no standards there, you just measure something. It doesn't make, it doesn't help me to know whether I'm healthy or not. So I think the question really is, and goes back to this design question, is that what is the kind of a reasonable, the most sensible and most effective way to assess, test whether the system is working? And there are two questions here. One is that standardized assessment almost always, like in the Dutch case, and I know the CITO is running these tests, and the purpose there is primarily to tell the policymakers and politicians that the system, the money that they put in the system is well spent. So they want to see the kind of how the system improves or what happens there. But you know what we decided to do in Finland 30 years ago, when this conversation was underway, actually in the Netherlands as well, but big part of the world, we said we don't need to test every child. Why do we need to run this same test on every kid every year if we just want to know how the system is working? And some people were saying that, but why? Of course we need to test everyone. And then, you know, I was one of them, and there were some others as well were saying that, but just to think about the health, that our health authorities, if they want to know what is the state of health, like adult health or children's health, they're not testing each and every child or adult. They just take a random sample and make sure it's a representative and covers the kind of a different groups, and then do a kind of a proper assessment of that sample, just like we can do in education. So there's, you know, Finnish educators and authorities and policymakers are big fans of kind of a high quality sample-based standardized assessments that will inform the government and politicians and policymakers how the system is going and where the issues are and where we need more kind of attention and help. And the other part of this argument is as well that, you know, going back to this, what we discussed earlier about the having research literate teachers. Like if you're research literate in any profession, you are able to ask questions like, in this case, the Finnish teachers were able to ask questions that, like, what might be the side effects, or like a consequences, unintended consequences of standardized, you know, testing each and every one, like you do in the Netherlands. And then we go to the research and we realize, you know, very quickly teachers begin to teach to the test. So they make sure that the kids are doing well in a test, which is, you know, if you have a good test, it's not a big issue, but oftentimes it's just a waste of time to make sure that the kids are getting a good grade in a test. The other side effect has been that we have more and more kids who find schooling boring, that they don't want to be trained to take a test and then forget everything and move on. That they want to learn things that they can use in their lives. And so, you know, that type of evidence, that type of research helped Finnish teachers and Finnish policymakers also to realize that maybe we don't need to have a standardized testing assessment policy and system that many other countries have, because there are alternatives to do that in a different ways. So that's why I think, going back to where I started this response, is the kind of how do we design systems, education systems and subsystems of education in a way that avoids the doing things that are not contributing to what the teachers are or what the system is trying to do with the kids. And that's why, you know, bureaucracy is the worst enemy of you know, making teachers to do things that will help the communities and kids and the parents to see happy and healthy kids. So that's why I think it goes back to the, you know, if you have a system where teachers are trained in a way that they're able to collectively or individually ask these questions, like, does this make any sense, or where's the evidence that, you know, this is the best way to move on, you will be able to avoid you know, situations that you were mentioning. And the other way around as well, if the teachers are not trained to do that, they often, like, again, going back to my Australian experience, that teachers just have to accept almost anything that comes as part of the policy or politics into schools, because they are not trusted or regarded as anyone who have a voice or opinion or view to these things. And that's why we have these huge issues in many countries around the world, is that schools have been built, they look like a Christmas trees, that everybody wants to have their own little things there at it, and then teachers and principals and kids are the ones who need to kind of survive and try to cope with this often a big messy system where there's a lot of stuff that doesn't really belong there.
Yeah, I was indeed, like while you were talking, I was thinking about this contrast that we have in the Netherlands. Like we have a teacher education that gives you a lot of tools to also examine and analyze students' thinking processes, like to understand where they're making mistakes and so on. And at the same time, this culture of standardizing tests and evaluating schools based on these tests, etc., has created that there are many Dutch teachers saying that, as it has created the so-called six culture, like in Dutch it's called the zescultuur, like students work for the six, so that's enough to pass, and many students, they don't want just to go further, like they just, as you say, they just study for the test. And some teachers, they are also like, because they have not so much time, sometimes especially the last year before the exam is very intense for students and for teachers. They just have the time to focus on the tests, and at the same time you have teacher education programs that gives you a lot of tools about how can you put more subjects together to work on projects with students, for example, that students have more understanding about the world. For example, I worked on a project on AI with a Dutch teacher and a history teacher. So we put a project together and we implemented it in the class. And it was very interesting, and the students were also very enthusiastic about it. But then you go back to reality and you say, hey, but we don't have the time to do that in the normal practice, and many students work just for the test. So there is this contrast in the Netherlands, which is, while you were talking, I was really thinking about it. It's really true, actually. And like also this, there's also discussion about autonomy. We talked about it a bit because here, and also read it in your book. Autonomy is very important for teachers and also for students. And talking about teachers, we even with the standardized tests in the Netherlands, we like to make our own choices, like didactic choices. And also for Finnish teachers is very important: autonomy of teaching, autonomy of making your didactic choices. And at the same time, it's very important also for students. We follow a lot in the teacher's education. We follow a lot the model of Stevens in the Netherlands, which says that the autonomy is the best way for students to learn to make choices, and making choices is a way to support learning. But I can imagine that autonomy can be implemented under key conditions. So I want to ask you, what can be these key conditions to support autonomy, and in a way that autonomy support learning?
Is your question more about teacher autonomy or autonomy in general?
Autonomy in general, and also about teacher and students autonomy. So it's
I mean, it's very difficult to have autonomy if you are not trusted to make these decisions, and often if there's no trust, there are kind of a tougher consequential accountability systems for teachers, meaning that if you make a wrong choice, you're going to suffer. There will be consequences. And this is a really bad idea, because very few people can operate in a place like this, where that there's a risk that if I fail or make a wrong choice, I'm going to lose my job, or I'm going to be punished. So that it doesn't work like this. So there has to be a certain degree of trusting people to do good, make right decisions, and if they make wrong call, that the system is designed in a way that will help them out from that. And there's no better way than you ask about the conditions. I think this professional nature of teaching, when it comes to teachers, is a really good one, because that means that the teachers often have the best knowledge and experience regarding choices and decisions regarding their own classroom. Like you were talking about the pedagogy or didactical choices. There's no better person than the teacher who can say that, in this context, in this class, in this topic, this is the best way to teach these particular kids. There's nobody there in the universe who can know this better. So we need to trust these teachers to make these kind of these types of decisions where the operations are. And this is simple. Anybody who's running a the business or industry in the same way where the kind of a high skill operations take place, they think the same way, that we can't manage these things from the top, say that this is how you do manufacture something or create or design something. You have to trust these people that they will do that. Trust is often misunderstood in a way that people think that you can just kind of hand over trust or mandates. You can give a political speech and say that all of a sudden we trust you. It doesn't go like this, because it's a cultural thing. It's something that everybody understands, that it's a built on relationships and traditions and values and honesty and all those things. And that's why the interesting thing in this Finnish story, that people often ask that how did you end up having this trust-based system that everybody basically celebrates? And it's like, my view is that I wrote a book a few years ago called In Teachers We Trust, where we go kind of through this history and evolution. And I think in the book we say that it took about 10 years, 1 decade in Finland to kind of do things and talk to people and communicate in the different levels, the minister and authorities and others, that, this is what trust looks like. Like we don't need to intervene anytime something needs to be done, how to do that. You can, use your own judgment. It doesn't happen overnight or in a year. So it's a kind of a thing that requires a building process. And I think also, the more the system is able to tolerate failure or kind of making mistakes, the better. And Finland is really good in that. I don't know about the other countries, but we have, for example, the annual day of failure every year, where we kind of celebrate the people try to do things and then it doesn't happen. And it's particularly true in education system, because if you look at and I've been studying histories of education reforms and kind of plans to change education basically all my life, and it's very difficult to find any like a really good study that says that we were successful. It almost always goes wrong. And then if the system, the society or the political system is not designed in a way that we can learn from the failure and then succeed, things start to go really wrong. So that's why the professionalism is the key of everything. So without professionalism, we cannot trust people. If we are not trusting in people, teachers and schools, we can't really see these new things and improvement taking place and happening there. So that's why I emphasize this professionalism before anything else. The master's research-based teacher education system that we have is a consequence. It's a follow-up of the idea of teachers being professionals, not the other way around. Often people think that we change the way we train teachers and then hope that something happens. We didn't do it that way, and I don't think that that's the right way to do that. We need to understand, and then you have many other things that you can do that you couldn't do otherwise. And this is exactly the thing that people need to understand about Finland. That what Finnish schools do, they only do because of this professional nature and trust and autonomy that they have there. And finally, Giacomo, if I can just kind of bring a little nuance or kind of aspect to this autonomy thing, because again, people often understand what the autonomy means and how to get that. That autonomy means that you can do whatever you want. That some people who have been commenting the Finnish system is that, okay, so your teachers you let them do whatever they want. So, no, we don't. And that's why we are using the term collective autonomy. That I think is a great concept, collective autonomy. And this is something that my good friend Andy Hargreaves and Michael Fullan used in their 2012 Professional Capital book. And the collective autonomy means that schools and teachers have more freedom from the bureaucracy and the system, but less freedom from one another. So meaning that autonomous teacher can't do whatever she or he wants to do, but the school or the collectively teachers can do a lot of things without a kind of a permission or or license from the top. And that is a different conversation about the autonomy than just say that Finnish teachers have autonomy. I don't think that Finnish teachers actually have autonomy per se more than anybody else, but we have established this collective autonomy, kind of a collective sense of autonomy, where very few teachers actually would say that, I don't care about what the others are doing, because I'm autonomous. I have freedom to do whatever I want to do. There are those too, but they're very few. Most teachers would say that we have an autonomy as a profession to act in a place that is a classroom, teaching and learning the best we think. What is the best thing that we think for the kids? I hope that this helps you to. It's an important notion, as you see.
I always say, Sahlberg, sorry, Giacomo, individual, be able to be individual in the community. That it's like, it's not just being part of the community, but also be people in it. And of course, trust is not a quick fix, but it's a deep surgical intervention, because it's built between relationship and working together. So let's hope to have the possibility to build it. And I see Michele here, so please share your thought with us.
Yeah, that's right.
Probably, Michele, you are on mute.
Yeah, I kept myself on mute. Forgive me. Yeah, I wanted to intervene, to throw my classical grains of sand into the smooth mechanism. I will not actually. The comment that just appeared, Pier Camillo Iovino, is suggest where to start. Pier Camillo observes correctly that in fact in Italy there is a complete opposite view, which is cultural. There is the idea that the teacher has autonomy, where autonomy means I basically do whatever I want. We are all aware, in fact, this happens again less, or at least we have fewer horror stories, fewer anecdotal stories, and fewer statistical elements of support. But it certainly increases with secondary education, junior high, and so-called scuole superiori, that you got teachers teaching whatever they feel like, and in whatever method they like. This is particularly true for the humanities topics, philosophy, history, literature, that have become often occasion for ideological preaching of one side or the other. Doesn't really matter. Some is more frequent than the other, but they're both present. And there is very extremely little, which is part of a national culture, a national general attitude, collective control. Let's put it this way. In Italy, just to be very honest, I saw it this morning, like walking by. If people drop a piece of paper or garbage on the floor of the street while walking, the guy behind them doesn't do, hey, excuse me, there's a trash can over there. In Finland and other places up north, they do. They'll come politely over and says, "Sir, I apologize, but you see there is a trash can over there." What does it mean? It means that this collective argument that Pasi is elaborating is very much the product of a cultural attitude of somewhat polite but stern and precise collective criticism and social control. In Italy, social control or enforcement, collective enforcement of social norms is often seen as a form of authoritarianism. In fact, we have even people theorizing that a true liberal, a true libertarian let people do whatever they want. There is no such a thing as pointing out that, in fact, you just drop the chewing gum on the sidewalk. So I'm wondering, this sounds like, well, it's all Italy. Well, it's not. In part, it has to do, this is a almost unavoidable product of large heterogeneous countries. So I would like to bring your final reflection to consider what's special about Finland. Finland is 5.5 million people, if I'm not incorrect. Very homogeneous. Yes, you've had a certain degree of outside immigration recently. Much less than any other continental country in Europe, in the continental below the Baltic Sea. I'm sure Finland is not an island, but it's in a strange position. very, very protected, so to speak, by the bad guy to the east and by the sea to the south, which have made you a tight community. I mean, I don't know Finland very well, but I've been enough times there to see, and I know enough Finnish friends to see that it's a very tight community in which there is a very shared set of norms and culture, which is not true in a country like Italy, it's not true in Spain, not true in France, not true, say, in the United States. And heterogeneity of any kind tends to bring about deviant behavior and make this collective form of enforcement of norms much harder to practice. Which means, yes, Pasi, I agree, you're stressing the professionality. But maybe the hidden factor behind the professionality or beside the professionality is that because of the collective tightness, you actually enforce meritocracy in an evaluation and punishment and reward in an implicit automatic form, which is relatively easy, as we know, in an homogeneous community where there is trust, friendship in some sense, and sharing of common values. It's much harder when the community is no longer that tight, is not that homogeneous, there are no common values, and therefore, as they say in game theory, the enforcement, the punishment strategy that enforce the cooperative outcome has to be carried out formally. It cannot be carried out by, how can I say, spontaneous reaction, right, that hits you on the moral ground. And at the end, you know, you and I are friends, we share a lot. I know I'm at fault. And it's a moral thing, and eventually I give in, or you give in. But that's because, you know, we've been molded together. If we're not, I don't give a damn about your moral disapproval of me. You can disapprove me as much as you like. I'll come late, I'll teach little, I drink coffee, and I shout to the student, hell with them. So I would like to throw this into the picture, because to the extent we are thinking about learning and what we can use, I think it's relevant we keep in mind that there is something special about your country that is not so easy to implement in other much bigger, much less homogeneous. So if you have some thought about that, then even though you're getting close to the end, thanks a lot. I've been listening, it's very interesting, and I just wanted to throw this as a consideration.
No, I'm not going to argue against. I think, Michele, your view is very true particularly in the kind of a general narrative about the societies and cultures. But I would still maintain my argument that, you know, in any society, not just the Finland, but if you have a profession, in this case, a kind of a teaching profession, where you have a stronger identity among the teachers, like Finland has, the identity that links to, you know, one teacher to another. And, you know, there are different ways to do that. For example, we have 100% voluntary union membership by teachers, but not just a teacher union as they are in many other countries that connects these individuals. But this union is called the education, what is it called? The education union, education professional, something like this. But it's the same, under the same umbrella where the lawyers union and medical doctors union and architects union, you know, the kind of a confederation of professionals. It actually says confederation of professionals in Finland. And you know, that is it's not often discussed here in this kind of a cultural meaning, that what does it mean for Finland to be a teacher, that you basically belong to the same union, if you wish, where the medical doctors and lawyers and others do. And when the kind of your labor agreements are negotiated, you are in this kind of a same pact as them. So it's this kind of a sense of belonging to a profession. I argue, Michele, without any challenging what you were saying, was absolutely right, is that it's easier to have this more kind of a cultural idea, particularly this collective autonomy within the profession, if you don't have that one. So, but you are right, you know, and this is not the only thing that is easier in Finland to do, the kind of a trust based autonomous or semi-autonomous profession. There are some other things as well that are much easier to do in a country like, or society, nation like Finland, but we probably don't have time to get into those ones.
Great. Thank you for your answer, Professor Sahlberg. And now we would like to explore the final time that we have together, focusing about Italy, lessons learned and unlearned. And particularly, I would like to ask you, which has been your experience in Italy? And from your perspective, what are some positive aspects that you found working here, and some, let me say, aspects that could be definitely be improved?
Yeah, no, I think it's a fair last question here, and but I must admit that since I lived in Torino for 3 years or so, it's been a while, and my work there, Valentina, as you probably know, was mostly about the European Union non-member country things. But I lived in Italy and saw many schools, and had a kind of a connection to what's happening there. So I usually don't answer the questions like this that you ask, but since you politely frame it, I can say a couple of things. That also, because I'm actively following the international developments, particularly in Europe, like what countries do. So what I'm going to say next may come with a kind of a wrong information or knowledge about some of these things. But if you ask me if you force me to think about Italian education currently, like what comes to mind, I would definitely say that may be a little bit contrary to what Michele was saying in the beginning, that I think that your primary education actually, and early childhood, there is a tradition of Reggio Emilia and Montessori and many others, that the kind of a foundation is strong. And it's probably stronger than in many other places, the early years and primary education. And, even looking at the how Italian children learn to read and write and do kind of a foundational skills in the early years, you're doing well, which is like, if you wouldn't have that, if I say that your real problem in Italy is the early years and primary, then we would have much more complicated situation. So, but that's what I see, is that when children start their educational journey, although there is this this early childhood gap in Italy, that is the time when the child stops receiving the parental leave and before the formal pre-primary education starts. I think it's age of 3 in Italy. That it's bigger than in OECD countries, but I still would say that this foundational education for young Italians is positive thing. The other thing, my work in Torino was about vocational education and training. So we were looking at the kind of a secondary vocational and post-secondary vocational education. And I do know from that time, I know that the Italian way of offering vocational and technical education in the secondary level is a fairly well organized, in a sense that it includes a lot of practical, hands-on, like a real work experiences. I don't know if this is the situation now, but I would definitely, based on the information and knowledge I have, is to say that there are good elements and strong things in that aspect of young people's education. You also asked about the challenges. What was your question about? What could be the focus in the future? So I think, again, I remember that there's one of the big challenges, I think it was also in one of your emails, is that there's a big difference between the education in the southern Italy and in the north, and which is like should be a conversation of itself, but it indicates that the issue that the education policy environment currently in Italy has is about equity, defining what equity in education, equity of educational outcomes means. And I think that it might be good to take a good look at how the equity is actually defined, and what are the ways how the equity of education outcomes is currently monitored or evaluated in the country. many countries around the world, they don't have like many policies, and policymakers talk about equity, but they don't define what it means. So we talk a lot about equity in education or excellence, but we don't often know what these terms are actually, what they mean. One thing that I think I would like to add, I was just looking at before this meeting, some of the improvements that you have experienced there is that still 10, 15 years ago, when I was there, there's a big issue about the early leavers who leave the secondary education too soon without graduation, and the progress that Italy has been able to do during the last 5 to 8 years is quite impressive. I mean, you have almost reached the OECD level of secondary school graduates. That has been a really good progress. Then I think finally, I don't know. We spoke about teacher education here, but I think that's probably one of those things that it depends on what your policy goals and dreams and aspirations will be. But if you start to consider about some of these things that we have been discussing here about having teachers as real professionals and akin to medical doctors and lawyers and others, I think that teacher education is something that we need to think about. The final word of warning here is that I think what I see happening around the world right now is that many countries are too much thinking about how to fix the old system, how to fix the pre-pandemic education system, so that we are using the OECD's PISA and these other metrics to kind of have a better future. But I think the opportunity that you have in Italy now, particularly with this movement of yours that you're building there, is to be bold and brave and think openly about what kind of education needs to be given to kids. And I know that you're currently testing, Giacomo, you mentioned what you do in the Netherlands about the AI, and I know that the Italy is one of those countries in Europe that is actively kind of creating and testing different ways how the technology and AI could be linked to the school. But that's my view is that the school education in the future, I mean within the next 5 years, needs to be very different. And if you can consider some of those things that we spoke earlier about, that having education system that would truly see each and every child as an individual and person, and that it's important to help everyone to realize their talent and creativity and passion. That is what I think is important. And Italy can.
If I can add a point that could be interesting also for the people that are listening to us, I found 2 OECD diagrams, which our viewers can find in the video description later, also with the title of your book, where I saw a big differences in the pathway of secondary school, because we see the difference in Italy. You have to choose the pathway for your, let me say, next education at 13 years old, while instead in Finland you have the choice to be done at around 16. And so beyond timing, the Finnish system also appears more flexible, because you have more time to evaluate, to discover yourself, and then do your final decision. So could you explain briefly why Finland opted for a later selection model in respect of Italy, from your perspective?
I think that's the way it's always been in Finland. It's been the end of compulsory. Now the compulsory education ends at when the young people turn 18, but it used to be 3 years ago. Until 3 years ago, it was 16, and that's where the students were choosing the academic secondary school or vocational school. It used to be, as I mentioned earlier, that when I went to school, it was the age of 10, just like in Germany, at 10 or 11, that's where you kind of choose where you go, and then what you choose, you just go whatever happens there. So So that might be there. Yeah, there are arguments that it might be good to have, give young people a little bit more time for this kind of a comprehensive educational environment, so that they can think about what they do, particularly when it comes to vocational and technical education, because many of those things that we're still training young people, the machines will do it in 10 years. And it's an unfortunate thing that we have vocational programs and schools that are preparing young people for things that will no longer be needed. So that's why it would be a good idea to just give young people a little bit more time to see what they really want to do and move that further on.
Okay, thank you, Professor Sahlberg. And now I can say that we try to end by looking forward, and therefore I have a final question for you. That is, if a let me say young group of policymaker, or let me say wannabe policymaker, asks you where to start in redesigning our system, what your honest advice would be, not only technically but also human speaking?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a good question. It's probably, Valentina, I would probably go back to your first question. Do you remember what you asked me in the first question?
Yes, the purpose.
Yes, what is the purpose? Because, that is something that is often undermined, that people, especially in this business where people take a kind of a model, let's say Finnish model of Singapore, and then try to kind of do what other countries are doing. I think, Europe is a great place for this conversation about purpose. And there's a good friend of mine in the Netherlands, I don't know, Giacomo, if you know Pista, who...
Pista, yeah.
Yeah, so he's one of the leading academics and philosophers very passionate about this this purpose, like what is actually, he actually calls it, what is the point? What's the point in education? Because that's what many young people are saying now, that what's the point of going to school? What's the point of learning this and that? And so my advice, Valentina, for particularly politicians and policymakers would be this, that be patient about this conversation. That can be sometimes hard and difficult, to kind of get clarity out of that. But we need to get this kind of a new sense of purpose, and there is this kind of a debate now. It's kind of a silent debate that has been there for many years between the OECD and UN organizations like UNESCO, for example, because the OECD's view has for a long time been that the purpose of education is like a duty that you have to, whether you want it or not, you have to commit yourself to lifelong learning. And there's nothing wrong. I'm not against lifelong learning, but seeing that as a duty is a different thing than what the for example, Pista is talking about. The UNESCO has been writing about that the lifelong learning education is a right. It's a human right. And it's easier to sell many of these things to young people if you say that that's your right, that you have a right to be educated, you have a right to have the education that you deserve in a school, rather than saying that it's a duty that you have to do that. And Europe is doing very well in this kind of a debate and conversation about how do we see education in the future, if the dream is the lifelong learning, that we need to continue learning throughout our lives. I don't think that this narrative about education as a duty, as a responsibility, that you have to do that all through your life, will be very attractive to young people. So that would be my kind of a call for young policymakers and politicians. Like, let's try to see if we can come up with a new idea of what the school is for. What's the point of school education, or universities? Like, and Michele, you know that better than I do, how the universities and higher education is in a crisis now in many places, because there are more and more young people who rather spend their hundreds of thousands of euros to learn somewhere else and different things, that going to the university and just have a degree that doesn't necessarily give you too much. So let's talk about the purpose and have a good open conversation, and listen to some of these bright minds who have been doing this thing before. And Europe is exactly the place to do that. That's where this conversation could take flight much better than anywhere else.
Michele,
If
would
I
you
may
like
add,
a close? Ah, sorry, Giacomo. And then Michele, if you want to
uh,
add
ju-
a remark, and then we went. Or
no, just adding one thing about what Michele said about like respect for others. So that is something that in Italy, yeah, we lack a bit. Let's say I want to connect it to what you were saying, Pasi, about Herbista, because it's also talk about the socialization. So schools are not just for learning a subject, but
Yeah.
also to socialize, to understand the others, to respect the others, and to live in a society. So that's one point that, like, because like I think 90% of Bachelor of Educations in the Netherlands are based on Herbista vision about education. So this purpose of teaching to kids how to socialize and how to interact with each other with respect for each other, I think that can be something that helps to build up this respect for society. So respect for others, is what Michele was saying before. So that can be also purpose in education.
Yeah, the interesting thing is that 400 years ago, when the public schooling, as we know it now, started in the Netherlands, it started exactly the same purpose, for this purpose. The Netherlands was the center of commerce and trade, with the people coming all around the world. And so the purpose of schooling was to make sure that people understand one another. They don't kill themselves because they have different religions and things. So that's where the education started initially. It was not about reading and writing those things, because you can't do anything if people are not like in misunderstanding who they are or not respecting the differences. So we are back to this kind of a 400 years ago started conversation. But Michele, what do you have in mind?
Oh no, I have a lot in mind, but I really want to play my role of listening. I ask my question that I think it's crucial to my thinking of what can be done to Italy, and but I share your view. I think it's the view of anybody that takes its humble activity as a scientist seriously. We debate, we learn, we think about it, and we'll try to adapt. One thing, if I have to say, you mentioned obviously the thing has been focused on Finland, but we've mentioned the Netherlands because of Giacomo's presence. But let me say, I spent most of my life in the United States in the last 43 years. And they're very different school system. The American one in particular is extremely heterogeneous, with excellence sometime and disasters in other. But one thing these three societies and other have in common: they have been debating intensively and almost obsessively since the 70s, as you mentioned at the very outset of the conversation, about changing, reforming, adapting, improving the school system. And they've made mistakes and they've done things right. But the point is that it's now more than half a century that it is at the center of the national debate, and people talk about it, and people are aware that you have to keep working on it. Extraordinarily, Italy hasn't done it. That's one thing that I find extraordinary about Italy. In Italy, everybody's very proud of their school system. You got nostalgic lyrics about this and that. What a great school system we have. We're the best in the world. We have the greatest culture. Oh my God, these are the days of the maturità ritual. We have movies about it. People cry. They have dinners. They get drunk about it. Lyrics. The national TV sing every year the praise. Oh, maturità. And then they keep teaching the same thing they taught in the 1920s. They keep teaching with the same method. And nobody faces the reality of a school system that has, in fact, failed generations of students, because the data are there. The data have no compassion. The data tells you repeatedly, year after year, you have failed 70-80% of your student body, the weakest, the least privileged, the least lucky, those that didn't live next to the very good school, and so on and so forth. So I think that's what I want to remark, which is beautiful to listen to people that have been thinking about that their whole life, like you did. And I just hope that the Drin Drin managed to convince a bunch of Italians, possibly the majority, that we better start questioning our education system, start changing it. We don't have necessarily to imitate or copy the Finnish, probably not. I mean, for the reason I said before, another. But the point is to start questioning, and that's what people have not done yet. And if you try to do it, actually, you get a reaction which is almost violent. You offend national pride and I find that quite revealing. So thanks a lot to all three of you for organizing this.
Thank you, Professor Sahlberg, and thank you for having reminded us that education should be a right and not only a duty. And thank you to everyone listening to us. See you next time.
Molto grazie a tutti.
Molto
Grazie
grazie.
a tutti. Buona serata.
Ciao.
Grazie Valentina,
Buona
Giacomo
serata.
e Pasi. Buona
Ciao, ciao.
serata a tutti. Proviamo a dire, ma anche a fare, l'ovvio.